What if I told you? One man, with one move, could tilt the destiny of nations. What if a single strategist, sitting in silence behind a desk, could cause governments to collapse, currencies to shatter, and economies to kneel? This isn't fiction. It's not a movie script. It happened. And the man behind it is a name you've all heard. Spoken with awe, with hatred, with suspicion. George Soros. Depending on who you ask, Soros is either a modern-day philosopher king or the puppet master of chaos. To some, he's a genius who unlocked the code of markets, turning perception into profit and philosophy into billions. To others, he's the world manipulator, a man who hides his claws behind philanthropy while quietly reprogramming societies. But here's the paradox. Both might be true. Tonight, we dive into the enigma of Soros. From a boy who survived Nazi-occupied Hungary, to the man who broke the Bank of England, to the billionaire who funds revolutions, activists, and entire cultural shifts. Ask yourself this: is Soros a visionary who sees the world more clearly than the rest of us? Or is he the architect of instability, using his wealth not just to predict history, but to write it? Stay with me for the next hour, because by the end, you will not only understand George Soros, you will understand the game he plays. And once you see the board, you'll never see global power the same way again. Fade to silence. Then, the story begins. George Soros was not born with power. He was born into chaos. 1930. Budapest, Hungary. A Jewish boy named Georgi Schwartz. His family lived under the shadow of a Europe descending into madness. The Nazis marched across borders. Bombs fell. Armies advanced. Survival wasn't about wealth. It was about cunning, disguise, and nerve. His father, Tivadar, was a lawyer, but more importantly, a strategist of survival. Tivadar forged documents, invented identities, and taught his son a lesson Soros would never forget. When rules are written against you, bend them. When systems are designed to destroy you, outthink them. This was Soros's first education. Not in mathematics, not in finance, but in adaptation, in manipulation of appearances, in mastering perception. He survived the Holocaust not by force, but by strategy. He learned to fade into the background, to become invisible when necessary, to wear masks and switch sides if survival required it. This is crucial. Soros's childhood was not about following the rules of the world. It was about rewriting them to stay alive. When the war ended, the boy who had learned invisibility set his sights on visibility. He left Hungary, passed through London, and stepped into a world that would shape his destiny. London, 1947. Soros studied at the London School of Economics, where he came under the influence of philosopher Karl Popper. Popper's core idea? The open society. A vision of a world where truth could only thrive in transparency, where authoritarianism had to be resisted at all costs. This seed, open society, would become Soros's ultimate banner. But remember, behind that philosophy was the boy who had survived tyranny not through ideals, but through strategy. Here lies the duality of Soros. A philosopher who believed in freedom, a survivor who mastered the art of deception. That combination, the philosopher king and the shadow strategist, would one day create the man powerful enough to move markets and reshape nations. Visual: a dimly lit office in 1960s New York. Cigarette smoke, stacks of paper, old ticker machines spitting numbers. A young man sits at a desk, eyes locked not on the noise of the market, but on its hidden rhythms. George Soros didn't become a financial legend by accident. He wasn't the son of Wall Street aristocracy. He wasn't born into the networks of power that dominated New York and London. He was, in many ways, an outsider, a refugee with an accent, walking into the most cutthroat game on earth. What separated Soros from the herd was not greed, it was perception. While most traders looked at numbers, Soros looked at psychology. While most investors obsessed over company reports, Soros studied crowds, fear, and belief. At the London School of Economics, under Karl Popper, Soros had absorbed a philosophy that truth was never fixed. It was always provisional, always shifting, always tested by reality. Soros carried that idea into the markets, and here he made his breakthrough. Markets are not reflections of reality. They create reality. Think about that. The average investor believes markets are like mirrors. They reflect the true value of companies, currencies, and economies. But Soros realized something much more dangerous. Markets are like funhouse mirrors, distorted, exaggerated, capable of making illusions appear real long enough to change the future itself. He called it reflexivity. Here's the essence. If enough people believe a stock is valuable, they will buy it. The price rises. The rising price attracts more buyers. Suddenly, the belief becomes true, not because of underlying reality, but because of the self-reinforcing loop of perception. But here's the sinister flip side. Once the illusion cracks, the collapse is just as fast, just as violent, just as self-reinforcing in the opposite direction. This was Soros's weapon. He wasn't just investing, he was playing with human psychology at scale. While other hedge fund managers built models of equations, Soros built models of belief. He studied when crowds would break, when illusions would collapse, and when governments would be powerless to stop it. His early years on Wall Street were not glamorous. He struggled, bounced between firms, and felt overlooked. But in 1969, Soros launched his own fund, what would eventually become the legendary Quantum Fund. The Quantum Fund wasn't like other funds. It wasn't cautious. It wasn't diversified to play it safe. It was aggressive, speculative, and designed to strike at weaknesses in the global system. Soros and his partner, Jim Rogers, took massive leveraged positions. They weren't afraid of volatility. They thrived in it. While Wall Street played checkers, Soros was playing multi-dimensional chess. And slowly, the legend grew. Year after year, the Quantum Fund outperformed, often by double-digit percentages. Investors whispered his name with awe. Rivals feared his unpredictability. He wasn't following the market, he was bending it. By the late 1980s, Soros had become a global force. He wasn't just another trader. He was something else entirely. A man who had discovered that if you understood the psychology of crowds, you could bend entire nations to your will. This realization would set the stage for the event that made him infamous forever, the night he broke the Bank of England. But before we go there, pause for a second. Consider what Soros had uncovered. Most of us believe wealth is about hard work, or even about numbers. But for Soros, wealth was about belief systems. He wasn't just trading money, he was trading illusions. And if you could control illusions, you could control reality itself. That is the secret George Soros carried into the 1990s. And it was about to detonate like a financial bomb. The storm before. Black Wednesday. The year was 1992. Europe stood at a crossroads. The Cold War had ended, borders were shifting, and the dream of a unified Europe was becoming reality. To bind themselves together, European nations created the exchange rate mechanism, the ERM. The idea was simple. Currencies would be pegged to each other, moving within narrow bands, so Europe could prepare for the ultimate goal, one single currency, the euro. But beneath the dream of unity lay cracks, economic cracks, political cracks, and one currency in particular carried the weight of history and pride, the British pound sterling. The pound was tied to the Deutsche Mark, Germany's currency. But Germany's economy was strong, disciplined, and hardened by reunification. Britain's economy was weak, sluggish, and drowning in high inflation. By entering the ERM, Britain was trying to look like a heavyweight fighter, while secretly carrying a broken rib. Most economists saw the tension. Most traders whispered about it. But very few were bold enough to confront a central bank directly. except for one man. George Soros watched the stage with the patience of a hunter. He studied the ERM not as a political project, but as a structure with a fatal flaw. And in that flaw, he saw opportunity. The setup. Why the pound was weak. Here's the reality Britain didn't want to admit. The pound was overpriced. By entering the ERM, the UK committed to keeping its currency within a fixed band against the Deutsche Mark. But Britain's inflation was high, its exports were suffering, and its interest rates were crippling businesses and homeowners alike. To defend the pound, the Bank of England had to keep interest rates sky high because the only way to keep a currency strong is to make holding it attractive. But every rate hike strangled the real economy further. Britain was in recession. Unemployment was climbing. It was a no-win scenario. If the government lowered rates, the pound would sink out of the ERM band. If it raised rates, the economy would bleed. To Soros, this was not just bad policy, it was inevitable collapse. And inevitability is the rarest thing in markets. It was like seeing a dam with cracks forming, knowing the flood wasn't a matter of if, but when. The bet. Soros goes all in. Most traders nibble. They test the waters. They place cautious bets. Soros was not most traders. He understood that in currency markets, scale is everything. You cannot move a mountain with a shovel. You need dynamite. So Soros prepared the dynamite. Through his quantum fund, he quietly built a position against the pound, shorting it, selling billions of pounds he didn't own, with the intent to buy them back later at a lower price. The position grew. $1 billion, $2 billion, $5 billion. By September 1992, Soros had amassed a $10 billion short position against the pound. This wasn't just a trade, it was an act of financial war. And Soros knew exactly who his enemy was. Not other trade. The battle. The Bank of England versus the Quantum Fund. Visual split screen. On one side, Soros in New York, calm, analytical. On the other, officials in London, sweating, phones ringing, panic rising. September 16, 1992, the day that would be known forever as Black Wednesday. The markets opened, and the attack began. Traders around the world smelled blood. If Soros was shorting, they wanted to short too. Billions of pounds were dumped onto the market. The Bank of England fought back. They spent their reserves, tens of billions, buying up sterling to prop up its value. But it was like trying to hold back the ocean with a bucket. Every pound they bought, Soros and others sold more. The government tried raising interest rates, first to 10%, then to 12%, then in desperation to 15%. Imagine that. Mortgage rates for British families quadrupling overnight. It was financial shock therapy, but the markets didn't believe them. They knew it was unsustainable. No government could sacrifice its economy forever just to defend a symbolic exchange rate. The more the Bank of England resisted, the more traders attacked. It was a global feeding frenzy. Hedge funds, speculators, banks, all piling in on Soros's side. By nightfall, the inevitable happened. The British government announced defeat. The pound was leaving the ERM. The Bank of England had been broken. The collapse. Sterling breaks. The fallout was immediate. The pound crashed. Billions in value evaporated. The government lost credibility. Prime Minister John Major's political reputation never recovered, and George Soros, he made $1.5 billion in a single day. One man, one trade, had humiliated an entire nation. The headlines were explosive. The man who broke the Bank of England. To his admirers, Soros was a genius who exposed the flaws of bad policy. To his enemies, he was a predator who profited off national misery. The aftermath. Soros the legend, Soros the villain. The truth, as always, is complicated. On one hand, Soros was right. Britain's membership in the ERM was unsustainable. His trade simply forced reality into the open. Some economists even argue he did Britain a favor. After the pound devalued, exports boomed, and the economy eventually recovered. On the other hand, the optics were brutal. Soros became the face of ruthless capitalism. Politicians called him the destroyer of nations. Newspapers painted him as the archetype of the manipulative speculator. And for millions of British families, the memory was pain. Mortgage rates, job insecurity, political chaos. They didn't see a philosopher or a visionary. They saw a billionaire profiting off their suffering. This duality would haunt Soros forever. The hidden lesson, what this reveals about power. Here is the deeper truth of Black Wednesday. It wasn't just about one man against one bank. It was about the limits of government power in the face of global capital. The Bank of England had billions. Soros had billions. But Soros had something the bank didn't: the crowd. Once traders believed the pound would fall, they made it fall. Soros didn't just bet on collapse, he catalyzed it. This is reflexivity in action. Perception becomes reality. And in that moment, Soros proved something terrifying. In a world of global markets, one man, if he sees the flaw, if he bets big enough, can bring a nation to its knees. That's why Black Wednesday isn't just history, it's prophecy. It showed the world that hedge funds, not just governments, could shape destiny. It revealed that money, in enough volume, becomes a weapon of mass destruction. And at the center of it all stood George Soros. Not just a trader, not just a billionaire, but a man who had turned perception into profit, strategy into power, and risk into history. The philosopher's crown. Soros and Karl Popper's influence. Behind every empire lies an idea. For Soros, that idea came from one man, philosopher Karl Popper. Popper taught him that absolute truths were dangerous, that societies, like markets, were fragile, that tyranny thrives where dissent is silenced. Popper's vision of an open society became Soros's intellectual compass. But here's the paradox. Philosophy in the ivory tower is harmless. Philosophy in the hands of a billionaire becomes something else entirely, an instrument of power. Soros believed that freedom must be protected by constant questioning, constant challenge to authority. But what happens when he became the authority? This is where the duality begins. The birth of the Open Society Foundations. In the 1980s, flush with billions from the Quantum Fund, Soros created what would become the Open Society Foundations, OSF. Today, OSF operates in over 100 countries, distributing more than $1 billion every year. On paper, OSF is philanthropy on a grand scale: scholarships for students, support for independent journalism, funding for courts, NGOs, and grassroots movements. Billions to fight apartheid in South Africa. Billions more to dismantle communism in Eastern Europe after the fall of the Berlin Wall. To many, this was noble. A billionaire actually spending his fortune on freedom instead of yachts and palaces. Soros didn't buy islands, he funded universities. He didn't build golden statues, he built think tanks and libraries. But to others, this was the mask of a manipulator. Because unlike anonymous charity, Soros's philanthropy came with philosophy. He wasn't just giving money, he was shaping societies in the image of his ideals. And when you have billions to spend, ideals become reality. The good deeds: universities, justice, and freedom. Let's look at the light side first. Soros poured hundreds of millions into Central Europe, creating the Central European University in Budapest, a school designed to train a new generation of leaders steeped in liberal values and critical thinking. He funded programs for criminal justice reform in America, challenging mass incarceration. He bankrolled HIV/AIDS research in Africa. He fought for Roma rights in Eastern Europe, for press freedom in the Balkans, for democracy movements in authoritarian states. To young activists in Poland, Czechoslovakia, or South Africa, Soros was a lifeline. His money printed underground newspapers, supported dissidents, and fueled the push for liberation. By the late 1990s, his foundations had spent billions. If philanthropy is measured by dollars given, Soros rivaled, and in some years outpaced, Bill Gates. To this day, Soros has donated over $32 billion to his foundations. It's one of the largest private efforts to reshape the world in history. So why then does his name drip with suspicion? The shadow side, accusations of manipulation and engineering revolutions. Because here's the other side of the coin. Critics argue Soros doesn't simply give money, he engineers outcomes. That OSF doesn't just support democracy, it funds specific parties, NGOs, and policies aligned with Soros's worldview. In Georgia, in Ukraine, in Serbia, when revolutions broke out, Soros's fingerprints were there. His organizations provided money, training, and networks to activists who toppled regimes. To supporters, this was democracy in action. To critics, it was foreign interference disguised as philanthropy. And here lies the mystery. Was Soros liberating nations or destabilizing them? Was he supporting grassroots revolutions or orchestrating them? Even in the United States, his name echoes in controversy. Soros funds prosecutors who push criminal justice reform. Supporters cheer. Critics claim he's undermining law and order. He funds pro-immigration policies, gender rights campaigns, anti-authoritarian movements. To progressives, he's a hero. To conservatives, he's a shadow puppeteer. The line between philanthropy and manipulation is razor thin. Because money at this scale doesn't just help, it steers. The duality, saint or scamester? Here's the deeper question. Is George Soros a saint or a scamester? To one camp, Soros is the rare billionaire who actually gives back, using his fortune to spread democracy, education, and human rights. To another, he is the ultimate manipulator, hiding behind the language of freedom to advance his own ideology and expand his influence. The truth may be both. Think of Soros as a chess master. On one side of the board, he places knights of philanthropy, scholarships, aid, healthcare. On the other, he places bishops of influence, NGOs, media, political donations. The game looks noble, but the outcome is control. Not necessarily control for personal greed. Soros doesn't hoard palaces or private jets, but control in service of his worldview. A world remade in the image of the open society. But then comes the darker thought. If one man can shape nations with his wealth and ideals, is that democracy? Or is it simply a new form of aristocracy, the philosopher king ruling not by crown, but by capital? The deeper question. Why does he really do it? This is the question that keeps people awake. Why? Is Soros truly altruistic, traumatized by fascism, driven to ensure no tyranny rises again? Or is he the manipulator, shaping societies not for freedom, but for control? Listen carefully to his own words. I am only rich because I know when I am wrong. This is reflexivity again. Soros doesn't believe in fixed truths. He believes in shaping outcomes. If markets bend under perception, why not societies? If reality can be manufactured in finance, why not politics? Maybe Soros isn't driven by good or evil in the way we imagine. Maybe he is driven by something else. The obsession to prove that philosophy can be made real, that the world itself can be coded, rewritten, hacked. That is why Soros remains one of the most polarizing figures of modern history. Because whether you see him as savior or manipulator, one fact cannot be denied. George Soros, the refugee from Budapest, became a man who not only profited from history, but began to write it. When you rise this high, enemies are inevitable. But the enemies George Soros has attracted are not just political rivals or Wall Street competitors. They are presidents, prime ministers, dictators, entire political movements. Why? Because Soros isn't just a billionaire, he's an idea in motion, and ideas terrify power more than armies. By the 2000s, Soros had become more than a financier or philanthropist. He was now a symbol. To some, the symbol of hope, the billionaire who funds democracy. To others, the symbol of corruption, the shadowy hand that bends nations to his will. And this is where the conspiracies were born. The enemy of nations consider Hungary, his birthplace. In the 2010s, Prime Minister Viktor Orban declared Soros public enemy number one. Billboards smeared Soros's face across Budapest, warning citizens of his plan to flood Europe with migrants. Orban's government accused him of undermining Hungarian sovereignty, of funding NGOs to destabilize borders and erase national identity. Irony: Soros built the Central European University in Budapest as a beacon of education. Orban forced it out. In Russia, Vladimir Putin accused Soros of orchestrating revolutions in Eastern Europe. Russian state TV painted him as a puppet master of uprisings, the secret architect of chaos. Soros's foundations were banned outright, labeled a threat to national security. In America, Soros is a lightning rod. Right-wing media paints him as the invisible hand behind every protest, every progressive cause, every district attorney with reformist policies. Some claim he funds caravans of migrants, others that he bankrolls every liberal protester holding a sign. The truth? Soros has spent billions funding progressive causes. The myth? That he single-handedly controls every upheaval across the planet. But myths are powerful. And the more powerful Soros became, the more the myths multiplied. The architecture of conspiracy. Why Soros? Why not Gates or Bezos or Musk? Because Soros fits the archetype. He's mysterious. He's foreign. He made billions, not by building things, but by breaking markets. He speaks with an accent, lives in shadows, and funds causes across borders. He is not a national billionaire, he's a global one. And global billionaires don't play by the rules of patriotism. They frighten both the left and the right. Thus, Soros became the perfect villain for a new century of paranoia. In the halls of power, his name is invoked to justify laws against NGOs. In the trenches of the internet, his name is whispered in conspiracy forums as the architect of the New World Order. Every shadow needs a face. For millions, that face became George Soros. The New World Order accusation. Here's the most common accusation: that Soros is not a philanthropist, but a globalist mastermind pushing for one world government. The logic runs like this. He funds immigration policies that weaken national borders. He funds media that criticizes nationalism. He supports supranational institutions like the EU. And it's true. Soros has said openly that he believes nationalism is a threat to the open society. That borders are artificial, and that humanity should move toward integration. But conspiracy theorists take this further. They claim Soros isn't just supporting integration, but orchestrating the collapse of nations to replace them with a centralized order under his control. It sounds like fiction, but the power of the accusation lies not in its accuracy, but in its emotional impact. Because when a billionaire spends billions, who decides whether it's charity or engineering? The global backlash. Stop Soros laws. In multiple countries, governments didn't just criticize Soros, they built policies against him. In Hungary, Orban's regime passed the Stop Soros law, making it illegal for NGOs to help undocumented migrants. The law was designed directly to shut down groups funded by Soros. In Israel, Prime Minister Netanyahu accused Soros of working to undermine the Jewish state by funding groups critical of government policy. In the US, Trump and his allies repeatedly pointed to Soros as a funder of protests, caravans, and left-wing prosecutors. Across continents, Soros had become a shared enemy, the unifying villain for leaders who rarely agreed on anything else. And here's the paradox. The more these leaders attacked him, the more his legend grew. The Soros myth machine. Now let's zoom out. Yes, Soros has enemies, but many of them are enemies he chose, because Soros himself admits, "When I look at the world, I see what is wrong and I try to fix it." But fixing the world means stepping on toes, crushing regimes, weakening borders, funding groups that challenge authority. This is not philanthropy as we know it. This is geopolitical intervention through capital. So is Soros a victim of lies, or the architect of his own myth? Both. Because Soros's real moves are often hidden in spreadsheets and grants, quiet transfers to NGOs and universities. But his image, whether as savior or villain, has taken on a life of its own. It is bigger than fact, bigger than truth. It is legend. And legends don't need accuracy to move nations. The psychology of hatred. Why does Soros attract such venom? Partly it's cultural. He embodies the global elite at a time when nations are turning inward. Partly it's political. He funds progressive causes in conservative strongholds. Partly it's psychological. Humans crave villains to explain chaos. When markets collapse, blame Soros. When protests erupt, blame Soros. When governments topple, blame Soros. He becomes the lightning rod, the explanation for forces too complex to understand. And here lies his strange immortality. Even if George Soros himself disappeared tomorrow, the myth of Soros would live on. Because the world needs its shadows. The shadow war, Soros, fighting back. Soros doesn't remain silent. He responds. When Orban demonized him, Soros poured more money into refugee aid. When Putin banned him, Soros increased funding in Eastern Europe. When the American right attacked him, he doubled down on progressive prosecutors. He does not retreat. He escalates. And that escalation fuels the fire, creating a perpetual cycle. The more he acts, the more enemies accuse him of conspiracy. The more enemies accuse, the more his legend grows. This is not philanthropy anymore. This is war, not with guns, with money, with ideas, with perception. The shadow war of Soros is not fought in battlefields. It is fought in universities, newsrooms, NGOs, and the minds of citizens. The eternal question. So, who is George Soros in this story? Is he the benevolent billionaire fighting authoritarianism with the only weapon he has, capital? Or is he the manipulator, bending nations, weakening borders, destabilizing systems to expand his influence? The answer may be that he is both. Philosopher and manipulator, saint and schemer. But here's the twist. It may not even matter what the truth is anymore. Because George Soros has already transcended truth. He is myth. He is symbol. He is the villain in someone else's story and the savior in another. And perhaps that is his greatest power. Every empire has one weakness: time. Every king, no matter how powerful, eventually faces the shadow of mortality. George Soros is now in his 90s, his body frail, his steps slower, and yet his name still shakes nations, sparks protests, and ignites conspiracy theories. But the true question is not about his life. It's about his afterlife. What happens when George Soros is gone? Does the myth vanish with him? Or does the machinery he built, the foundations, the networks, the open society web, continue without its architect? This is not a trivial question, because Soros himself has planned meticulously for it. The dynasty of ideas. Unlike many billionaires, Soros never cared much about yachts, palaces, or vanity. His empire was not a kingdom of things, but a kingdom of ideas. And ideas don't die when their creators do. Through the Open Society Foundations, Soros has built an infrastructure designed to survive him. Billions allocated to NGOs, universities, media outlets, activist networks, each functioning like a cell in a vast organism, spreading his philosophy long after his voice is silent. He is not leaving behind a company. He is leaving behind an ideological dynasty. This is more dangerous and more powerful than wealth, because money can be taxed, spent, or lost. But networks of influence, these are eternal. The children of Soros. The Soros legacy isn't just institutional, it's personal. His son, Alexander Soros, has stepped into the role of chairman of the Open Society Foundations. Young, articulate, and deeply committed to his father's mission, Alexander has been called Soros 2.0. But Alexander faces a different world, a world where the Soros name is already legend and already radioactive. Will he be able to carry the torch without the same aura of mystery his father had? Or will he burn brighter, younger, and bolder in an age where digital activism, social media, and global crises demand new types of intervention? The transfer of power is already happening. The machinery is already in motion. George Soros may fade, but the Soros network is eternal, the myth that outlives the man. Here's the paradox. Death does not end legends. It magnifies them. When Soros dies, two things will happen instantly. His enemies will celebrate, claiming the puppet master is gone. His mythology will double in size because martyrs always grow in the imagination. Conspiracies don't die with their subjects. They metastasize. Every protest, every economic shock, every election will still carry whispers. Soros is behind it, or his network, or his ghost. Even if his physical presence disappears, the myth of Soros will remain a permanent fixture of global psychology, because the human mind doesn't let go of archetypes, and Soros has become an archetype, the global manipulator, the secret hand, the philanthropist schemer. The battle for the narrative. So, what happens next? When Soros dies, a narrative war begins. His supporters will cast him as a saint of democracy, a visionary who spent billions to uplift freedom. His enemies will cement him as the architect of chaos, a shadow villain who destabilized nations. The truth will dissolve somewhere in between, irrelevant in the face of myth. And this narrative war won't just be about memory. It will be about power. Because the meaning of Soros will shape how people interpret globalization, immigration, democracy, and finance for decades. His death is not an ending. It's a beginning. The legacy institutions. Let's examine the machinery more closely. Open Society Foundations, OSF, active in over 120 countries, funding legal reforms, education, human rights, media independence. With billions in assets, it's one of the largest philanthropic networks in history. Universities and education. From Central European University to scholarships across the world, Soros has planted seeds in generations of thinkers. These seeds will grow into leaders, judges, journalists, activists, all carrying his philosophy. Media influence. Independent media outlets across Europe and beyond receive OSF funding, ensuring narratives that challenge authoritarian regimes continue. NGO networks. From refugee aid to anti-corruption watchdogs, Soros-funded NGOs create the infrastructure of what he calls open societies. This is not one institution. This is an ecosystem. And ecosystems don't collapse when one tree falls. The eternal opposition. But the survival of Soros's vision guarantees something else. The survival of his enemies. Because myths need opposition. If the Soros network thrives, his critics will thrive too. Governments will still use his name as a rallying cry against foreign interference. Conspiracies will still need him as their invisible hand. Even in death, Soros will be fighting wars. Not with his body, but with his ghost. The inevitable transformation. So what is the lesson for us, the listeners, the ordinary investors, the curious minds trying to understand this enigma? It's this. Soros is not just a man, he is a case study in how power evolves. When billionaires build companies, their empires die with the stock price. When billionaires build ideas, their empires transcend generations. Soros understood this. He didn't just trade currencies, he traded in futures, not the financial contracts, but the futures of societies. And that is why he will never truly die. That is the Soros legacy. A man will vanish, but the idea, the network, the myth, the legend will remain. Whether you see it as salvation or manipulation is up to you. But one thing is certain. The story of Soros does not end with Soros. It has only just begun. From myth to manual, you've heard the legend, you've seen the shadow, you've walked through the conspiracies, the networks, the enemies, the legacy. But let's turn the mirror toward you. What can you, sitting here, listening now, learn from George Soros? Because here is the truth. It doesn't matter if you believe he's a saint, a villain, or a manipulator. What matters is this: he played the game differently. And if you want to rise above mediocrity, above the illusions, above the traps of the system, you must decode his methods, translate them into your life, and build your own power. Soros is not just a man to analyze. He's a case study in domination. Lesson 1. Master Contrarian. Thinking. George Soros didn't become a billionaire by following trends. He became a billionaire by breaking patterns. When everyone believed the British pound was stable, Soros saw the cracks. When others trusted in the permanence of communist regimes, Soros predicted collapse. When others thought markets were rational, Soros embraced chaos. This is the first lesson. Never accept the surface story. Look where others don't. Question the unquestioned. Practical for you: don't chase hype investments. Ask, what's hidden beneath? Don't follow mass psychology. Ask, what are they blind to? Build the habit of second-order thinking. Not what happens, but what happens after that. Contrarianism is not about rebellion for its own sake. It's about finding profit where others see none. Lesson 2. Use crises as opportunities. Soros once said, "I am only rich because I know when I am wrong." But more importantly, he knew when the world was wrong. He thrived in crises. He made billions when currencies collapsed, when economies cracked, when systems faltered. While others panicked, he calculated. Practical for you: don't fear volatility, study it. Every crash hides opportunity. Build cash reserves not to sit idle, but to strike when others freeze. Train your mind to stay cold when others burn with panic. The masses see danger, the masters see discounts. Lesson 3. Build networks, not just wealth. Soros understood that money alone isn't power. Networks are. Through his Open Society foundations, he created influence infrastructure. Activists, journalists, academics, lawyers, judges. Together, they formed a living web that could shift societies. Practical for you: don't just chase money, chase alliances. Build a network of mentors, investors, and partners who magnify your reach. Invest in relationships that expand your influence across industries and borders. Because wealth without networks is fragile, but networks can create wealth endlessly. Lesson 4. Think generationally. Most investors think in quarters. Soros thought in decades. Most billionaires leave inheritance. Soros left ideology. He built foundations to shape the world beyond his lifetime. His son continues the mission. His institutions are immortal. Practical for you: don't just plan for next year. Plan for 30 years. What systems, assets, or creations will outlive you? Think about legacy not as ego, but as leverage, a structure that compounds your influence. The long game beats the short hustle every time. Lesson 5. Control the narrative. Soros was demonized, mythologized, and attacked. But he understood something crucial. Narratives matter more than numbers. He didn't fight myths with balance sheets. He fought with ideas, statements, visibility, and silence, strategically deployed. Practical for you: craft your story before others craft it for you. In business, perception often shapes reality. Control how people perceive you. Don't fight every attack. Sometimes silence magnifies mystery, and mystery is power. Remember, money buys influence. Narrative builds empires. Lesson 6. Play multidimensional games. The average person plays checkers: buy, sell, save. Soros played 4D chess. Currencies, politics, NGOs, media, psychology, all moving simultaneously. He didn't see markets in isolation. He saw them as living systems connected to society, culture, and power. Practical for you: zoom out. Ask, how does this investment connect to politics, culture, tech, and human behavior? Don't just learn one domain. Study across finance, psychology, history, and strategy. Become a system thinker, someone who sees patterns across worlds. This is how you move from player to architect. Lesson 7. Accept being misunderstood. Every visionary is hated before they're celebrated. Soros was accused, smeared, and targeted, but he kept moving because he understood this. To be extraordinary is to be controversial. If everyone agrees with you, you're not leading, you're following. Practical for you. Build resilience against public opinion. Accept criticism as the cost of innovation. Never dilute your vision to please the crowd. To create a new reality, you must be willing to be the villain in someone else's story. Lesson 8. Knowledge is the final weapon. At his core, Soros was a philosopher. He studied Karl Popper. He obsessed over ideas. He treated markets like experiments. Knowledge was his ultimate hedge, and that's why he always seemed one step ahead. Practical for you. Become a perpetual student. Study daily. Learn across disciplines. Treat knowledge as compound interest. The more you learn, the faster your insight grows. Read what others ignore. Explore the uncomfortable, the complex, the hidden. Because in a world of noise, clarity is wealth. The listener's call to action. So here's the cinematic twist. Soros is not just out there, he's a mirror. The question isn't whether Soros is a genius or a manipulator. The question is, are you willing to rise above the illusion like he did? Are you willing to think contrarian? To see crisis as opportunity? To build networks? To think beyond your lifetime? To master narrative? To play 4D chess? To be misunderstood? To worship knowledge? If yes, then you are already walking the path. Not of Soros the man, but of Soros the archetype, the strategist, the myth maker, the game designer. Soros is mortal, but the lessons are eternal. The myths may cloud him, the conspiracies may haunt him, but the strategies, the playbook of power, are there for anyone bold enough to study and apply. The world is not fair, the game is not neutral. But now you've seen behind the curtain. The choice is yours: stay a pawn or become a player.